Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Imagine standing at the altar on your wedding day, ready to say, I do, when your sister storms in, all eyes on her, to announce she's pregnant. What would you do if your family told you to be happy for her instead of being upset? The morning of my wedding was everything I'd dreamed it would be. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and everything seemed to be falling into place. I stood in the bridal suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids, as they fluffed my dress and assured me that I looked stunning. Jake and I had worked tirelessly to plan this day, pouring our hearts into every detail. It was supposed to be the start of our forever, and I couldn't wait to walk down the aisle. As the ceremony began, my nerves melted away, replaced by pure joy as I locked eyes with Jake. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and I knew I'd never felt more loved. The officiant began the ceremony, and I was so focused on Jake that I barely noticed the crowd of friends and family gathered to witness our vows. But then, just as the officiant asked if anyone objected to our union, or something along those lines, it happened. Out of nowhere, my sister, Hannah, stood up from her seat near the front. She didn't just stand. She waved her arms dramatically to get everyone's attention. "Wait, I have something to share," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet reverence of the moment. The room fell silent, and I could feel every pair of eyes shift from me and Jake to Hannah. My heart sank, and a wave of panic coursed through me. What on earth was she doing? "I'm pregnant," Hannah announced, her grin stretching from ear to ear. The collective gasp that followed felt deafening. A few scattered claps broke out, and some relatives murmured congratulations, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in shock. Jake's hand tensed around mine, and I saw the confusion mirrored in his eyes. Hannah, oblivious to the tension she'd created, continued to bask in the attention. She placed a hand on her belly, as if she were already showing, and laughed as people began whispering excitedly to one another. It was like she thought she was the star of the show. My mother, sitting just a few seats away from Hannah, clapped her hands together and exclaimed, "Oh, Hannah, that's wonderful news!" Her smile was radiant, as if this was the best thing that could have happened. Meanwhile, I felt like the floor was about to give out beneath me. This was supposed to be my moment, mine and Jake's, and Hannah had hijacked it without a second thought. I glanced at my dad, who looked as stunned as I felt, but he said nothing. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly unsure how to proceed. Jake leaned in and whispered, "Do you want to stop?" "No," I whispered back, my voice trembling. "Let's just get through this." The ceremony continued, but the magic of the moment was gone. My vows felt hollow, my smile forced, and all I could think about was Hannah's announcement. She had stolen the spotlight on the one day that was supposed to be about Jake and me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she had done it on purpose. By the time we were pronounced husband and wife, my joy had been replaced by a simmering anger. As we walked down the aisle to the sound of polite applause, I caught a glimpse of Hannah beaming in her seat, soaking in the attention she had claimed for herself. I wanted to scream, to demand why she couldn't wait a single day to share her news. But I knew I couldn't make a scene. Not now, not on my wedding day. Instead, I plastered on a smile and prepared to face her at the reception, where I knew this wasn't over. The ceremony ended with applause, but I couldn't shake the cloud that had settled over me. As Jake and I walked back up the aisle together, I forced myself to smile for the cameras and wave at the guests, but my mind was elsewhere. I replayed Hannah's announcement over and over in my head, each replay making me angrier. Jake squeezed my hand as we reached the back of the venue. "You okay?" he asked gently, concern etched into his face. "Not really," I admitted, "but I'll be fine. Let's just get through the reception." Jake nodded, giving me a reassuring smile, but I could tell he was just as frustrated as I was. We'd worked so hard to make this day special, and now it felt like Hannah had taken something irreplaceable from us. At the reception, the tension only grew. Everywhere I looked, people were gathered in small groups, whispering and glancing at Hannah. She was practically glowing as she moved from table to table, accepting congratulations and chatting about baby names and due dates. It was as if the wedding had become an afterthought, overshadowed by her announcement. My frustration simmered under the surface as Jake and I made our rounds, thanking guests and posing for pictures. By the time dinner was served, I could feel my patience wearing thin. When I finally spotted Hannah standing alone near the bar, I knew I couldn't hold back any longer. I marched over to her, my hands clenched at my sides. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Of course, she said, her smile faltering. I led her to a quieter corner of the room, away from the guests, and took a deep breath before letting my anger spill out. What were you thinking? I demanded, keeping my voice low but firm. This was supposed to be my day, Hannah. Mine and Jake's. And you turned it into your announcement party. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, as if she genuinely didn't understand why I was upset. I thought everyone would be happy, she said. This is exciting news for the family. I didn't mean to take attention away from you. Didn't mean to? I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. You stood up in the middle of my ceremony and announced you were pregnant. How could you possibly think that wouldn't take attention away from me? Before she could respond, my mom appeared out of nowhere, as if she'd sensed the tension. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't be upset, sweetheart. Hannah's news is a blessing. You should be happy for her." I stared at my mom in disbelief. Happy for her? I repeated. She hijacked my wedding, and you expect me to be happy about it? She didn't mean any harm, my mom said, her tone soothing but infuriating. And besides, it's not every day you find out you're going to be an aunt. This isn't about being an aunt, I snapped. This is about the fact that she chose my wedding to make her announcement. She could have waited until tomorrow. Or any other day. Hannah crossed her arms, looking defensive. I thought it would make the day even more special, she said. Everyone loves good news, and this is good news. It was supposed to be my good news, I said, my voice trembling with anger. My wedding was supposed to be about Jake and me, not about you. Before the conversation could escalate further, Jake appeared at my side, placing a calming hand on my back. Everything okay here? He asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. Just fine, Hannah said quickly, her smile returning as if nothing had happened. I'll let you two get back to your guests. She walked away, leaving me standing there with Jake and my mom. My mom shook her head and said, "You need to let this go, sweetheart. Family is more important than a single day." Jake's hand tightened on my back as I stared at her, stunned. This wasn't just a single day, I said quietly. This was my wedding day. But clearly, that doesn't matter to you. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, my emotions swirling as I tried to process what had just happened. I felt betrayed, not just by Hannah, but by my entire family. How could they not see how much this had hurt me? As the reception continued, I plastered on a fake smile and tried to enjoy the evening, but the damage had been done. What should have been the happiest day of my life now felt tainted, overshadowed by my sister's selfishness and my family's refusal to stand by me. By the end of the night, I was emotionally drained. As Jake and I drove away, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness. This was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful chapter in our lives, but instead, it felt like I'd been robbed of something I could never get back. Growing up, there was never any doubt about who the star of the family was. Hannah had a natural charm that seemed to captivate everyone she met. She was the golden child, the one who got straight A's, excelled in every sport she tried, and always seemed to be the center of attention. Teachers adored her, classmates wanted to be her, and my parents couldn't stop bragging about her accomplishments. Meanwhile, I was the quieter one. I didn't mind staying out of the spotlight, but it hurt when my achievements were overshadowed by Hannah's endless string of successes. I worked hard in school, but my B+ in algebra was barely a footnote compared to Hannah's science fair trophies. When I joined the choir, my parents attended exactly one recital, but they never missed a single one of Hannah's swim meets. As adults, the dynamic hadn't changed much. Hannah still had the uncanny ability to command a room, her stories drawing laughter and admiration at every family gathering. My parents doted on her, always asking about her job, her hobbies, her life. I was often relegated to the background, the one who showed up early to help set the table and stayed late to wash the dishes. I learned to live with it, mostly, but my wedding was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be the one day that was about me, the one time I could stand in the spotlight without Hannah stealing it. Yet, even that had proven to be too much to ask. In the days following the wedding, I couldn't bring myself to face my family. The anger and sadness were too raw. Every time I thought about Hannah's announcement, it felt like a slap in the face. I replayed the moment over and over, questioning whether I was overreacting or if my feelings were justified. Jake tried to reassure me, but even his calm, steady voice couldn't completely soothe the storm brewing inside me. "You have every right to be upset," he told me one night as we sat on the couch. "What she did was selfish, and it's okay to feel hurt." Hearing him say that helped, but it didn't erase the ache. The part that hurt the most wasn't just what Hannah had done. It was the way my family had responded. Instead of supporting me, they had dismissed my feelings, telling me to be happy for her as if my pain didn't matter. A week after the wedding, my mom called me. I let it go to voicemail, but her message was predictable. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Don't let this thing with Hannah upset you. She didn't mean any harm. Family is more important than holding on to grudges." Her words only fueled my frustration. It wasn't a thing with Hannah. It was my wedding day, one of the most important days of my life, and she had turned it into her own personal announcement party. How could they not see that? Hannah also tried reaching out, sending me a chipper text. "Hey, hope you're not mad about the wedding. I didn't mean to upset you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before finally deleting it. I wasn't ready to talk to her. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work and tried to focus on the life Jake and I were building together. But the hurt lingered, bubbling beneath the surface like a wound that wouldn't heal. Every family gathering I skipped, every phone call I ignored, felt like a small act of rebellion against a lifetime of being overshadowed. But avoidance could only take me so far. I knew I couldn't ignore my family forever. Sooner or later, I'd have to confront Hannah and the rest of them and decide whether I was willing to forgive or if this was the final fracture in an already fragile relationship. The question that haunted me was whether my family would ever truly see me, not as Hannah's quieter, less impressive sister, but as someone worthy of their attention and respect. For now, that answer remained painfully unclear. A few weeks after the wedding, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Hannah. I stared at her name on the screen, my stomach tightening. I hadn't spoken to her since that day, and part of me wanted to let the call go to voicemail. But curiosity and a flicker of hope that she might finally apologize got the better of me. I swiped to answer. "Hey," she said, her voice as cheerful as ever. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." Her tone caught me off guard. It was light, casual, as if nothing had happened. "I'm fine," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "That's great," she chirped. "I've been meaning to call, but you know how crazy things have been lately." I waited for her to acknowledge what she'd done at the wedding, to offer some kind of apology or explanation. But instead, she launched into a long-winded update about her pregnancy. "Anyway," she continued, "we've been thinking about names, and oh my gosh, it's so hard to choose. We're leaning towards something classic, but not too old-fashioned, you know? Like maybe Grace or Oliver." I gripped the phone tighter, feeling my frustration build with every word. She didn't even seem to realize or care that I hadn't responded. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Hannah," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "Do you even realize how much you hurt me by announcing your pregnancy at my wedding?" There was a pause, and for a brief moment, I thought she might finally understand. But then she said, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just thought it would make the day even more special." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "Special for who?" I demanded, because it sure didn't feel special for me. "Well, everyone was so happy," she said defensively. "I thought it would be a nice surprise. People love good news, and it's not like I planned to steal the spotlight." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not planned? You stood up in the middle of my ceremony, Hannah. You didn't even wait for the reception or, I don't know, literally any other day to share your surprise." "I really didn't think it would bother you this much," she said, sounding genuinely confused. "I mean, you're married now, so why does it matter?" It was just one moment that took over the entire day. I shot back. "Do you know how many people came up to me at the reception to talk about you instead of my wedding? It was supposed to be about Jake and me, but you made it about you. I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, her tone dismissive. My grip on the phone tightened. "That's not an apology, Hannah. Saying you're sorry for how I feel isn't the same as taking responsibility for what you did." "Well, what do you want me to say?" she snapped. "I can't go back and change it. It's done." "That's the problem," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You don't even think you did anything wrong." Hannah sighed dramatically. "Look, I didn't call to fight. I just wanted to check in and share some happy news. If you're going to hold a grudge, that's on you." I felt my chest tighten with frustration and sadness. "You don't get it," I said quietly. "And I don't think you ever will." "Maybe not," she said, her tone softer now. "But I hope we can move past this eventually. We're family, and family's supposed to stick together." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The conversation had drained me, and it was clear that no amount of explaining would make her see things from my perspective. "I'll let you go," she said after a long silence. "Take care." When the call ended, I set my phone down and stared at it, my emotions swirling. I felt angry, hurt, and most of all, exhausted. It was clear that Hannah wasn't going to offer the kind of apology I needed or deserved. When Jake came home that evening, he found me sitting at the kitchen table, lost in thought. "What's wrong?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "Hannah called," I said. His expression darkened. And nothing," I replied. "She doesn't get it, Jake. She doesn't see how much she hurt me, and she probably never will." He reached across the table and took my hand. "You can't force her to understand," he said gently. "But you can decide what you're willing to accept and what you're not." His words stayed with me long after he went to bed. For years, I had bent over backward to accommodate Hannah, to keep the peace in our family, even when it meant swallowing my own feelings. But this time, I wasn't sure if I could or should let it go. After the call with Hannah, I spent days thinking about everything that had happened. Her non-apology, her complete inability to see how her actions had affected me, and my family's unwavering support of her. It was all too much. I realized that if I didn't speak up now, this pattern would keep repeating. I'd spend the rest of my life letting Hannah overshadow me, and I wasn't willing to do that anymore. The next family gathering was a casual Sunday lunch at my parents' house. I debated skipping it altogether, but Jake encouraged me to go. "If you don't say something now, you're just going to keep holding it in," he said. "You deserve to have your voice heard." So I went. As soon as I walked through the door, I could feel the tension in the air. My mom greeted me warmly, but there was an edge to her smile, like she knew I wasn't just there for the casserole and small talk. Hannah was already there, sitting at the dining table and laughing with my dad about something. She looked up and waved when she saw me, her expression as cheerful as ever. "Hey sis," she called out. "Glad you could make it." I forced a polite smile and nodded, but inside, I was bracing myself. After we'd eaten and most of the family had migrated to the living room, I pulled Hannah aside into the kitchen. My heart was pounding, but I knew this conversation couldn't wait any longer. "Hannah," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need to talk to you." She looked at me curiously, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Sure. What's up?" I took a deep breath. "I need you to understand something," I began. "My wedding was supposed to be about Jake and me, but you made it about you. That wasn't okay." Hannah's cheerful demeanor faltered, replaced by a look of mild annoyance. "I already told you I didn't mean to upset you," she said. "I thought it would make the day even more special." I shook my head. "Hannah, it didn't make the day special. It ruined it. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to watch everyone fawn over you while Jake and I were supposed to be celebrating our marriage?" She frowned, as if she hadn't considered that possibility. "I didn't mean for that to happen," she said, her voice defensive. "I just thought people would be happy for me." "This isn't about people being happy for you," I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's about you deciding that your news was more important than my wedding. You didn't even ask if it was okay. You just did it." Hannah looked taken aback, her usual confidence shaken. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she said quietly. "It was a big deal to me," I replied. "And if you can't understand that, then I don't know what else to say." There was a long pause before she said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Her words hung in the air like a bitter echo. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but at least I had said my piece. For the first time, I felt like I had taken control of the narrative, refusing to let Hannah's actions define my happiness. As I turned to leave, my mom walked into the kitchen, her eyes narrowing as she looked between us. "What's going on in here?" she asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "Just talking," I said, brushing past her before she could press further. Back in the living room, Jake gave me a questioning look, and I nodded slightly to let him know everything was okay. I could feel the weight of the confrontation lifting, replaced by a sense of relief. That night, as Jake and I drove home, I told him about the conversation. It wasn't the apology I wanted, I admitted, but at least I said what I needed to say. Jake reached over and took my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Standing up for yourself isn't easy, but you did it." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The hurt from Hannah's actions hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like it was controlling me. I had drawn a line in the sand, and whether or not she chose to respect it was up to her. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how much I had let Hannah's actions and my family's reactions dictate my happiness. I realized that it wasn't just about the wedding. It was about a lifetime of feeling overshadowed and dismissed. This time, though, I wasn't going to let it define me. I was done being the quiet one, the one who let things slide for the sake of keeping the peace. From now on, I was standing up for myself, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. It was a small step, but it was the first step toward reclaiming my voice and my sense of self. And for the first time, that felt like enough. In the days following the confrontation with Hannah, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering sadness. Standing up for myself had been empowering, but it didn't erase the pain of feeling dismissed by my family. Through it all, Jake had been my constant, patient, understanding, and always ready to listen when I needed to vent. One evening, as we sat on the couch after dinner, I poured out my frustrations for what felt like the 100th time. It's like no matter what I say or do, they always side with Hannah, I said, my voice tinged with bitterness. It's exhausting. Jake placed his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. I know it hurts, he said gently, and I know it's not fair, but you don't have to keep carrying this by yourself. You've got me now, and I'm always going to be in your corner. I looked up at him, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. Sometimes I wonder if I'm overreacting, I admitted. Like maybe I should just let it go and move on. He shook his head firmly. You're not overreacting. Your feelings are valid. What Hannah did was selfish, and your family's reaction only made it worse. But here's the thing. You don't need their approval to live your life. We're building something together, and that's what matters most. His words hit me like a wave, washing away some of the doubt that had been weighing me down. He was right. I had spent so much of my life seeking validation from my family, trying to prove that I was just as important as Hannah. But I didn't need their validation anymore. I had Jake, and together, we were creating a life that was ours alone. That conversation was a turning point for me. For the first time, I realized that I didn't have to let my family's behavior dictate my happiness. I couldn't change the way they treated me, but I could change how I responded to it. Jake and I sat down together and made a plan to prioritize our happiness. We agreed to set boundaries with my family, starting with limiting the amount of time we spent with them. If they can't respect you, they don't deserve unlimited access to your life, Jake said firmly. At first, the idea of distancing myself from my family felt strange and uncomfortable. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had spent years bending over backward to accommodate them, often at the expense of my own well-being. It was time to put myself and my marriage first. We also decided to focus on creating our own traditions and building a support system outside of my family. We started hosting small dinners with friends, celebrating holidays in our own way, and finding joy in the little moments that made our life together special. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jake reached over and took my hand. I know this hasn't been easy, he said, but I hope you know how proud I am of you. You've been through so much, and you're still standing. His words brought tears to my eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. I don't know what I'd do without you, I said, squeezing his hand. You'll never have to find out, he replied with a smile. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice a shift in myself. I felt lighter, freer, and more in control of my life. Setting boundaries with my family wasn't easy. My mom frequently called to guilt-trip me, and Hannah sent text messages filled with casual updates that I wasn't ready to engage with. But Jake was always there to remind me that I didn't have to respond unless I wanted to. You're allowed to protect your peace, he told me one evening. You don't owe anyone access to your life if they're not willing to respect you. That simple statement became my mantra. Slowly but surely, I started to reclaim my happiness. I poured my energy into my marriage, my career, and my friendships, surrounding myself with people who lifted me up instead of tearing me down. Jake's unwavering support was the foundation that allowed me to grow. He reminded me that I was more than the shadow of my family's dysfunction, more than the overlooked sister, more than the hurt and anger I had carried for so long. Together, we were building a life filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly free to be myself. It wasn't easy to let go of the hope that my family would change. But as Jake and I sat together on the couch, planning our future, I realized that I didn't need them to change in order to be happy. I had already found everything I needed in the life we were creating together. Things had finally started to feel normal again. Jake and I had settled into a new routine, one where we prioritized our happiness and let go of the constant need to please my family. I still spoke to them occasionally, but I kept my distance, choosing to protect my peace. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. That sense of calm shattered during an innocuous Sunday lunch with my aunt. She and I weren't particularly close, but we had always gotten along. She had stopped by to drop off some leftover baked goods and stay for a cup of tea. We chatted about mundane topics, work, the weather, and her recent gardening exploits, until she casually brought up the wedding. I still can't believe Hannah's big surprise, she said with a laugh, stirring sugar into her tea. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I asked cautiously. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she had said too much. Oh, well, just how she announced her pregnancy at the wedding. She was so excited about it. She told me weeks before that she thought it would be the perfect surprise. I felt my blood run cold. She planned it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Oh, yes, my aunt said, waving her hand dismissively. She said she wanted to wait for a special moment. And what's more special than a wedding? She thought everyone would love it. She chuckled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I managed to keep my expression neutral until my aunt left. But as soon as the door closed behind her, the calm facade shattered. My hands shook as I replayed her words in my head. Hannah's announcement hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. It had been calculated. She had knowingly chosen my wedding, one of the most important days of my life, as the stage for her perfect surprise. The anger I had been working so hard to let go of came rushing back, hotter and more intense than before. I felt betrayed all over again, not just by Hannah's selfishness, but by the realization that my family had likely known about her plan and done nothing to stop her. When Jake came home later that evening, he found me pacing the living room, my face flushed with emotion. What happened? He asked, immediately sensing that something was wrong. I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a furious stream. He listened patiently, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he placed his hands on my shoulders and said, "You need to confront her." "I already did," I said bitterly. "And it didn't make a difference." "This is different," he said firmly. "She planned this, and she needs to understand how deeply she hurt you. If she doesn't, nothing will ever change." His words hit me like a wake-up call. I had spent weeks trying to move on, convincing myself that it wasn't worth fighting over anymore. But this new revelation changed everything. Hannah's actions weren't just thoughtless, they were deliberate. And if I didn't stand up for myself now, I never would. The next morning, I texted Hannah and asked if we could meet. She replied almost immediately, suggesting a coffee shop near her house. I agreed, even though the idea of facing her made my stomach churn. When I arrived, she was already there, sipping an iced latte and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. "Hey," she said brightly. "It's been a while." I sat down across from her, skipping the pleasantries. "I need to talk to you about the wedding," I said, my tone leaving no room for misinterpretation. She raised an eyebrow, her smile fading slightly. "Again? I thought we already talked about this." "We did," I said evenly. "But what we didn't talk about is the fact that you planned your announcement. Aunt Linda told me everything. How you thought it would be the perfect surprise, how you'd been planning it for weeks. You knew exactly what you were doing, Hannah." Her face flushed, and for a moment, she looked genuinely startled. But then she shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "I didn't think it was a big deal," she said defensively. "Everyone was happy for me. I don't see why you're still upset." "Because it wasn't your day?" I snapped, my voice shaking with emotion. "It was supposed to be about Jake and me, and you made it about you. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to realize that my wedding was just a stage for your big announcement?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. "No, you don't get to dismiss this. I've spent weeks trying to let it go, but hearing that you planned it, that you chose to overshadow my wedding on purpose, made me realize that I deserve better. I deserve an apology, Hannah, a real one." For once, she didn't argue. She looked down at her drink, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "I didn't think about it that way," she said quietly. "I was so excited about the baby that I guess I didn't stop to think about how it would make you feel. I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start." For the first time, I felt like she was actually listening to me, like she understood the impact of her actions. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice softening slightly. "But this can't happen again. If we're going to have a relationship, you need to respect my boundaries. That means thinking about how your actions affect other people. Not just you." She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were finally on the same page. Whether or not things would truly change remained to be seen, but at least I had taken the first step toward holding her accountable. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for weeks. The anger hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like it was controlling me. For the first time, I felt like I was taking back my power, and that was enough. The coffee shop meeting with Hannah had started on a tense note, but nothing could have prepared me for how the conversation would escalate. After learning from my aunt that Hannah's pregnancy announcement and my wedding was planned, I knew I couldn't let it slide. The anger and hurt I'd tried to bury came rushing back, demanding resolution. Sitting across from her at the table, I wasted no time getting to the point. Aunt Linda told me about your perfect surprise, I said, my voice steady but cold. You plan to announce your pregnancy at my wedding. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, was it? Hannah's smile faltered. For a second, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, but she quickly regained her composure. Yeah, I planned it, she admitted with a shrug. I thought it would make the day even better. What's the problem? Everyone was happy for me. Her dismissive tone was the final straw. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest, my hands gripping the edge of the table as I leaned forward. The problem, I said, my voice trembling, is that you made my wedding about you. You didn't even think about how your actions would affect me, or Jake. That's not what family is supposed to do. Hannah's expression shifted from defensive to startled, as if she hadn't expected me to push back so directly. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said quickly. I just thought. No, I interrupted, my tone sharp. You didn't think. Or maybe you did, but you didn't care. Either way, it was selfish, Hannah. It was one of the most important days of my life, and you turned it into a platform for your news. Do you have any idea how that felt? Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw guilt flicker across her face. It was clear that she hadn't truly considered the impact of her actions until this moment. I thought people would celebrate both of us, she said quietly. I didn't think about how it might take away from your day. Of course you didn't, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. Because you're so used to being the center of attention that it didn't even cross your mind. Do you know how humiliating it was to feel like a guest at my own wedding? To hear people talking more about you than about Jake and me? Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached up to wipe them away. I didn't mean for that to happen, she said, her voice breaking. But it did, I said. And the fact that you didn't mean to doesn't erase the hurt you caused. I've spent weeks trying to move past this, but I can't until you understand how deeply you hurt me. This wasn't just about the wedding, it was about respect, and you didn't show me any. For a moment, there was only silence between us. The noise of the coffee shop buzzed around us, but it felt like we were in our own little bubble, the weight of the conversation pressing down on both of us. Finally, Hannah looked up at me, her cheeks wet with tears. You're right, she said, her voice trembling. I was selfish. I was so caught up in my own excitement that I didn't think about you. I'm sorry, really sorry. It wasn't the half-hearted, I'm sorry you feel that way apology I'd heard before. This time, her words felt genuine, raw with emotion. I know I can't take back what I did, she continued, her voice thick with regret. But I want to make it up to you. I don't know how, but I'll do whatever it takes. Her sincerity caught me off guard. I had spent so long expecting the worst from her that seeing her take accountability felt almost surreal. I appreciate that, I said, my voice softening. But making it up to me isn't about grand gestures. It's about being better, about thinking about how your actions affect other people and respecting their boundaries. She nodded, sniffling as she wiped her eyes with a napkin. I could do that, she said, and I promise I'll try to be more mindful in the future. I don't want this to come between us. It already has, I said honestly. But this is a step in the right direction. It's going to take time, Hannah. Trust doesn't come back overnight. I know, she said, but I'm willing to do the work. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The apology didn't erase the pain of what she'd done, but it was a step toward healing. For the first time, I felt like she truly understood the impact of her actions, and that gave me a glimmer of hope that things could change. That evening, I told Jake about the conversation. He listened intently, nodding as I recounted Hannah's apology. Do you think she meant it? He asked. I think so, I said, but only time will tell if her actions match her words. Jake wrapped his arm around me and kissed my temple. You did the right thing by confronting her, he said. Now it's up to her to prove that she's willing to change. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a sense of closure that had eluded me for weeks. The road to repairing my relationship with Hannah wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt possible. The days after my confrontation with Hannah were an awkward but necessary transition. For the first time in years, I felt like I had set a boundary and Hannah had acknowledged it. Still, the road ahead was uncertain, and I wasn't entirely sure if her promise to change would hold. To my surprise, she started making an effort almost immediately. She began texting me more often, not just to share updates about her pregnancy, but to genuinely ask how I was doing. How's work going? She asked in one message. I saw a recipe for your favorite dessert and thought of you, she said in another. At first, I couldn't help but feel skeptical. Was this her way of smoothing things over without actually addressing the underlying issues? But as the days turned into weeks, Her sincerity started to feel real. One afternoon, Hannah called me out of the blue. "I wanted your opinion on something," she said hesitantly. "We've been thinking about nursery colors, and I thought you might have some good ideas." Her request caught me off guard. Hannah had never been the type to ask for my advice, especially about something so personal. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What are you thinking so far?" She rattled off a few ideas, and we ended up talking for nearly an hour, not just about the nursery, but about her hopes and fears for motherhood. For the first time, it felt like she was opening up to me, not as the golden child or the center of attention, but as my sister. Despite her efforts, I knew that rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy. The hurt from her actions at my wedding still lingered, and it wasn't something I could simply forget. During one of our conversations, I decided to address it head-on. "Hannah," I said cautiously, "I want you to know that I appreciate the effort you're making. It means a lot to me." "I'm glad," she said, her tone warm. But I continued, "I need you to understand that trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. What happened at the wedding really hurt me, and it's going to take time for me to fully move past it." She was quiet for a moment before responding. "I get that," she said softly. "I know I can't fix what I did, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I just want us to be okay again." Her words felt genuine, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that she truly wanted to change. "It's going to take time," I said, "but I'm willing to try if you are." "I am," she said firmly. "I really am." From that point on, our relationship started to shift. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when I felt a flicker of resentment or doubt, but it was progress. Hannah made a conscious effort to include me in her pregnancy journey, sharing updates about doctor's appointments, baby names, and even asking me to help plan her baby shower. At first, I was hesitant to get involved. The thought of celebrating her pregnancy, given how it had been announced, felt bittersweet. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was an opportunity to move forward. Helping her with the baby shower wasn't just about her. It was about showing myself that I could let go of the past. When the day of the baby shower arrived, I found myself feeling unexpectedly excited. Seeing Hannah genuinely happy, surrounded by friends and family, reminded me of why I had wanted to rebuild our relationship in the first place. After the guests had left, Hannah pulled me aside. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "This day wouldn't have been the same without you." "You're welcome," I said, surprised by how much her gratitude meant to me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like Hannah was trying to see things from my perspective. She wasn't just making amends. She was making an effort to be a better sister. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how far we had come. Our relationship was still a work in progress, but it felt like we were finally moving in the right direction. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt like a barrier between us. Rebuilding trust wasn't easy, but it was worth it. For the first time, I felt like I was getting to know the real Hannah, the one who wasn't perfect, but who was willing to try. And in the end, that was enough. As time went on, life began to feel more balanced. The intensity of the wedding drama faded, replaced by the everyday rhythm of work, home, and my growing relationship with Jake. While the hurt from Hannah's actions hadn't vanished, it no longer loomed over me like a storm cloud. I had started to heal, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Hannah continued to make an effort. She respected the boundaries I had set and showed genuine interest in my life. Not in the superficial, "How's it going?" way, but in a way that felt meaningful. She asked about my work projects, remembered little details about my day, and even made a point to check in with Jake. In turn, I found myself softening toward her. Forgiveness is a tricky thing. It's not about erasing the past, but about making a choice to let go of the anger and resentment that weigh you down. I realized that holding on to those emotions wasn't helping me. It was only keeping me tethered to a version of Hannah that I didn't want to see anymore. We weren't as close as we had been when we were kids, and maybe we never would be. But we were trying, and that effort, however imperfect, was enough to rebuild something that had once felt completely broken. When Hannah's due date approached, she invited me to be part of her support team at the hospital. "You don't have to," she said quickly, as if she were afraid I might say no. "But it would mean a lot to me if you were there." I hesitated for a moment. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because the invitation felt so vulnerable, so unlike the Hannah I had grown up with. "Of course I'll be there," I said finally, and the relief in her smile made my chest ache in the best way. The day her baby arrived was surreal. As I stood in the hospital room, watching Hannah cradle her newborn daughter, I felt a wave of emotions that were impossible to put into words. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears, and said, "Do you want to hold her?" I nodded, carefully taking the tiny, wriggling bundle into my arms. The baby's warmth and soft coos filled me with an unexpected sense of peace. In that moment, all the anger, frustration, and hurt I had carried for so long seemed to fade into the background. Life isn't perfect, and neither is family. We're messy, flawed, and sometimes we hurt each other more than we realize. But as I stood there holding my niece, I understood something that had eluded me for years. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. It's about making room for love, even in the midst of imperfection. Hannah and I still have our moments, times when old habits resurface or when boundaries are tested. But those moments no longer define our relationship. We've learned how to talk through our issues, to acknowledge each other's feelings, and to find common ground even when we don't see eye to eye. As I handed the baby back to Hannah, she looked at me with a soft smile. "Thank you for being here," she said. "I know I don't always say it, but it means so much to me." "Of course," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. Walking out of the hospital that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. Life would never be perfect, and my relationship with Hannah would always require effort. But I had learned that the messy, imperfect moments are often the ones that teach us the most about forgiveness, growth, and love. Family is complicated, and sometimes it's hard. But when both sides are willing to put in the effort, it's possible to move forward. And that's exactly what we were doing.